I'm Brooke, 28 years old, watching security footage of my parents jimmying my apartment lock at 2 a.m. while I'm hiding in my bedroom closet. My mother finds my work documents and starts photographing them while my father searches through my jewelry box. I suddenly realize this isn't the first time because all those missing items and moved furniture finally make sense. As they approach my bedroom door, I hold my breath and make a decision that will change our relationship forever. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with family members who just don't understand boundaries, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Trust me, what happens next will show you exactly why sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. My parents had helped me get this apartment right after college, insisting on keeping a spare key for emergencies. At first, I was grateful because moving to the city alone felt overwhelming and their support meant everything to me. They found this place, negotiated with the landlord, even helped me move in. What daughter wouldn't appreciate such caring parents? The first incidents were so small I almost didn't notice them. $20 missing from my wallet that I figured I must have spent and forgotten. My favorite yogurt disappearing from the fridge when I was sure I hadn't eaten it. Books rearranged on my shelf in a way I didn't remember doing. Mail that seemed to have been opened and resealed. I started questioning my own memory and wondering if the stress from my new job as a financial analyst was getting to me. When I mentioned these things to my parents during our weekly dinner, they exchanged concerned looks. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand, saying I'd always been forgetful even as a child. My father added that living alone for the first time could be disorienting and maybe I was just overwhelmed with adult responsibilities. They suggested I make lists, get more organized, perhaps even see someone about my stress levels. I left that dinner feeling foolish for bringing it up. The incidents escalated slowly over the next few months. I found my mother's pearl earring under my bed one day, the distinctive one from the set my grandmother had given her. When I returned it, she laughed and said she must have dropped it while helping me clean last month, except she hadn't been over to help me clean in 3 months. Another time, I discovered my father's prescription bottle in my bathroom medicine cabinet. He claimed he'd left it during a visit when he had a headache, but I distinctly remembered him not using my bathroom that day. Things got serious when I noticed my work documents had been disturbed. As a financial analyst at a major investment firm, I sometimes brought home confidential reports to review. I always kept them in a specific order in a locked drawer in my home office. One morning, they were clearly out of sequence, and one report had a small coffee stain that wasn't there before. My blood ran cold because these documents contained sensitive information about upcoming mergers that could be worth millions if someone traded on that knowledge. I started paying closer attention and noticed more disturbing patterns. My laptop browser history showed searches I hadn't made about my company's clients. My personal journal had been moved from my nightstand to my dresser. Photo albums were in different positions. Someone had definitely been in my apartment multiple times without my permission, and the only people with a key were my parents. Instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to get proof. I borrowed a nanny cam from my friend Tara, who used it to watch her dogs while at work. I set it up disguised as a clock radio, positioned to capture anyone entering my apartment. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks made my stomach turn. My parents were entering my apartment at least twice a week, always when they knew I'd be at work or out with friends. The footage showed them methodically going through everything. My mother read my mail, photographed my bank statements, and even sat at my desk scrolling through my planner. My father searched through drawers, checked my refrigerator, and inspected my closets. They worked like a team, one keeping watch while the other invaded my privacy. The worst part was how comfortable they looked, like this was completely normal behavior. I watched them discover my birth control pills and saw my mother shake her head disapprovingly while showing them to my father. They found receipts from dinners with my boyfriend Derek and discussed them at length. They read birthday cards from friends, examined new clothes I'd bought, even smelled my laundry. It was beyond invasive because it was systematic surveillance of my entire life. The breaking point came when they confronted me about things they had no way of knowing unless they'd been snooping. During what I thought would be a normal Sunday lunch, my mother casually mentioned that she was concerned about my relationship with Derek. She knew exactly where we'd gone for our anniversary dinner, how much he'd spent, and that we'd stayed at a hotel afterward. My father added that he didn't think Derek was suitable for me, mentioning specific details about his job and salary that I'd never shared. When I asked how they knew these things, they smoothly deflected. My mother claimed I must have mentioned it and forgotten. My father suggested maybe Derek had told them, which was impossible since they'd only met twice briefly. Then came the real shock as my mother leaned forward and said she was worried about me taking birth control, that it wasn't healthy for someone my age unless I was planning to sleep around. The accusation in her voice was clear, and I realized they'd been using their break-ins to gather ammunition to control my life. That night, I sat in my apartment feeling violated in a way I couldn't fully articulate. These weren't strangers stealing from me but my own parents systematically invading every aspect of my privacy. They knew about my finances, my health, my relationships, my work, everything. And they were using that knowledge to manipulate and control me. I finally understood that the small things I'd dismissed weren't forgetfulness on my part but evidence of their repeated violations of my home and my trust. This wasn't love or concern but something much darker, and I knew I had to take action to protect myself. The next morning, I called a locksmith and paid $300 to change every lock in my apartment. My hand shook as I watched him work, knowing this was a declaration of war against my parents but feeling I had no choice. I didn't tell them about the change, hoping maybe they'd get the message when their key didn't work. That naive hope lasted exactly 3 days before my world exploded at my workplace. I was in the middle of preparing a presentation for senior management when reception called to say I had visitors in the lobby. My parents stood there with tears streaming down their faces, my mother clutching my father's arm like she might collapse. The receptionist looked concerned, and several of my colleagues were already staring. Before I could guide them somewhere private, my mother wailed loud enough for half the floor to hear that I was breaking their hearts by shutting them out. She demanded to know what they'd done to deserve such cruel treatment from their only daughter. The scene escalated quickly. My father's voice boomed through the lobby as he accused me of being influenced by toxic friends who were turning me against my family. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing about how they'd sacrificed everything for me and this was how I repaid them. Security approached, unsure whether to intervene in what looked like a family crisis. I tried to calm them down, suggesting we talk outside, but they refused to move until I explained why I'd changed the locks without telling them. My boss, Richard, appeared in the lobby, drawn by the commotion. My parents immediately turned their performance toward him, with my mother grabbing his hands and begging him to help their daughter who was clearly having some kind of breakdown. She told him I'd been acting strangely, cutting off family, becoming paranoid and secretive. My father nodded gravely, adding that they were considering having me evaluated for mental health issues but wanted to speak with my employer first since I spent so much time at work. The damage to my professional reputation happened in real time as I watched colleagues exchange worried glances. Richard guided us to a conference room, where my parents spent an hour painting a picture of me as unstable and possibly dangerous to myself. They mentioned finding concerning items in my apartment during their visits, which they claimed were welfare checks. They twisted every boundary I'd tried to set into evidence of mental illness, and Richard listened with increasing concern. By the end of that meeting, I was placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. HR explained it was standard procedure when family members raised such serious concerns about an employee's mental state. I tried to explain about the break-ins, but without proof I'd shared with work, it sounded exactly like the paranoid delusions my parents had described. The knowing look between Richard and the HR representative when I mentioned hidden cameras made me realize how deep a hole my parents had dug for me. The required psychological evaluation turned into another battleground. My parents had somehow convinced the company's designated therapist that they needed to be part of my assessment for a complete picture. I sat in that sterile office watching them paint themselves as devoted parents trying to help their troubled daughter. They brought up childhood incidents twisted to suggest long-standing mental health issues. They mentioned finding medication in my apartment, conveniently leaving out it was just birth control. Every protest I made was met with sad head shakes and comments about how I'd always had trouble accepting help. Fighting back required every ounce of strength I possessed. I brought the security footage on a flash drive, finally showing the therapist clear evidence of my parents breaking into my apartment. Her expression changed as she watched them rifle through my belongings, but my parents quickly pivoted. They claimed I'd given them permission to check on things while I was at work, that I was forgetful and often asked them to look for important items. They suggested the footage was taken out of context and wondered aloud if I'd set them up because of my paranoid tendencies. It took 3 sessions and testimonies from friends before the therapist cleared me to return to work. Even then, the damage was done. Colleagues looked at me differently, conversations stopped when I entered rooms, and Richard assigned another analyst to work with me on sensitive accounts. My professional reputation had been tainted by my parents' theatrical performance, and I knew it would take years to fully recover from their sabotage. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their invasion tactics. Unable to use their key, they found other ways into my apartment. I came home one evening to find my bedroom window open and my jewelry box contents scattered across my dresser. The window lock had been jimmied from outside, probably from the fire escape. My laptop was warm despite being shut when I left, and my browser history showed someone had been researching apartments in my parents' neighborhood. The message was clear that changing locks wouldn't stop them. I called the police, but the responding officers treated it like a minor family dispute. They took notes about the forced window but seemed skeptical when I explained it was my parents. One officer actually asked if I was sure I hadn't left the window open myself and forgotten. When I showed them the security footage from before, they said it was from weeks ago and didn't prove anything about today's incident. They suggested I work things out with my parents like adults and left without filing a real report. My landlord became the next pressure point. A week after the window incident, I received a warning letter about disturbing other tenants. Apparently, my parents had been showing up at all hours, ringing neighbors' buzzers when I wouldn't answer, and telling anyone who'd listen that they were worried about my safety. Mrs. Chen from upstairs reported they'd tried to convince her to let them into the building, claiming I might be hurt inside. Another neighbor said they'd been asked to spy on my comings and goings. The landlord warned that continued disturbances could result in eviction proceedings. Derek offered to let me stay at his place, but my parents somehow discovered his address within days. They appeared at his building early one morning, pressing every buzzer until someone let them in. Derek found them outside his door, demanding to know where I was and accusing him of kidnapping their daughter. His roommate threatened to call the police, which finally made them leave, but the damage to that living situation was done too. Derek's roommate didn't want the drama, and I couldn't blame him for asking that I not stay over anymore. Every escape route I tried to create was systematically blocked by my parents' relentless campaign. They'd turned my workplace into a surveillance site, made my home unsafe, alienated my neighbors, and even invaded my boyfriend's space. I felt like a trapped animal with predators circling closer every day. The system that should have protected me instead enabled them because who could believe that loving parents would torment their successful daughter this way? But I was learning that when controllers lose control, they'll destroy everything rather than let go. The technology warfare began when I discovered something that made my skin crawl. My phone had been acting strangely, battery draining faster than usual and getting hot for no reason. When I took it to the phone store, the technician found 3 separate tracking apps hidden deep in the system. My parents had installed them during one of their break-ins, giving them real-time access to my location, text messages, call logs, and even remote microphone activation. The violation felt so complete I threw up in the store bathroom after he showed me. Removing the tracking apps triggered an immediate response. Within hours, my parents called my workplace claiming someone had stolen my identity and was using my credit cards fraudulently. They told the bank they were listed as emergency contacts and had noticed suspicious activity on my accounts. Despite having no legal authority, they managed to convince a customer service representative to freeze all my accounts for my protection. I spent 3 days without access to my money, unable to pay for food or gas while proving to the bank that I was indeed myself and my parents had no right to control my finances. The work interference escalated beyond their initial performance. I started receiving emails from concerned colleagues about messages I'd supposedly sent. Someone using a spoofed email address nearly identical to mine was sending bizarre messages to coworkers at 2 or 3 in the morning. The emails contained rambling thoughts about feeling overwhelmed, questioning reality, and making vaguely threatening statements about the company. IT traced them to various internet cafes around the city, and security footage from one showed my father at a computer during the exact time an email was sent. My social circle became their next target. Friends started calling me with worried questions about emails and calls they'd received from my parents. Tara told me my mother had called her crying, begging her to stage an intervention for my apparent mental breakdown. My college roommate Lisa received a long letter detailing my supposed symptoms and asking her to report any concerning behavior. They contacted ex-boyfriends, old professors, even my high school guidance counselor, building a narrative that I'd always been unstable but was now reaching a crisis point. The isolation strategy worked perfectly. One by one, friends started declining invitations to hang out. Some were honest enough to say they couldn't handle the drama. Others made excuses that became increasingly transparent. My book club asked me to take a break until things settled down. The gym buddy I'd worked out with for 2 years suddenly changed her schedule. Even Tara, who'd been supportive initially, admitted she was scared of getting pulled deeper into what looked like an ugly family situation that might affect her own job since we worked in related fields. Then came the betrayal that cut deepest. My younger sister Claire called asking to meet for coffee. I'd kept her mostly out of the situation, hoping to protect our relationship and thinking she lived far enough away to avoid our parents' daily manipulations. She hugged me when we met, looking genuinely concerned, and I spent an hour pouring out everything that had been happening. She listened sympathetically, asked thoughtful questions, and promised to talk to our parents about backing off. I left feeling hopeful that finally someone in the family understood. 2 days later, I discovered Claire had been recording our entire conversation. My parents played portions of it back to me during another ambush, this time at the grocery store. They'd edited clips to make me sound paranoid and vindictive, removing context that explained their behavior. Claire stood there between them, unable to meet my eyes as my mother announced they were united as a family in getting me the help I clearly needed. The sister I'd protected and trusted had been their spy all along, and that betrayal hurt almost more than everything else combined. The health insurance manipulation showed their willingness to risk my actual well-being for control. I was still on their insurance plan, having stayed on it after college because it was good coverage. Without warning, they canceled my coverage effective immediately. I found out when my pharmacy couldn't fill my asthma inhaler prescription. The pharmacist helpfully called the insurance company while I waited, only to be told the plan holder had removed me due to concerns about prescription drug abuse. My parents had told the insurance company I was doctor shopping and getting dangerous medications, providing just enough twisted truth to make it stick. My car became another weapon in their arsenal. First, I found a GPS tracker magnetically attached under the bumper. After removing it, I discovered 2 more hidden in less obvious places. Then my tires started going mysteriously flat, always when I had important meetings or plans with Derek. The mechanic found small punctures that looked deliberate. My oil was contaminated with sugar twice, requiring expensive flushes. The final straw was finding my brake lines had been loosened, discovered only because I'd become paranoid enough to have everything checked regularly. The mechanic said I was lucky I hadn't had an accident. The apartment damage escalated to a frightening level. I came home from a weekend at Derek's to find holes punched in my walls. My parents left a note saying they'd been looking for hidden drugs since I was clearly addicted to something to treat them this way. They'd pulled up carpet edges, removed electrical outlet covers, even dismantled part of my bathroom cabinet. The destruction looked like a raid, and they'd done it knowing I couldn't call the police without them claiming they were saving me from myself. I finally scraped together money to hire a lawyer, hoping legal action might stop the harassment. She listened to my story with increasing concern but delivered crushing news. Restraining orders against parents were notoriously difficult to obtain without clear evidence of physical violence or explicit threats. The property damage was concerning, but they could claim tenant rights since they'd helped secure the apartment. The workplace interference was problematic but not criminal. Even the brake line tampering couldn't be definitively linked to them without witnesses or footage. She advised me to document everything meticulously and wait for them to make a mistake that crossed into clearly illegal territory. The documentation became my obsession and lifeline. I created spreadsheets tracking every incident with dates, times, witnesses, and evidence. I uploaded security footage to multiple cloud services in case they somehow accessed my devices. I sent copies of everything to a new email account they didn't know about. My life became about building an airtight case while trying to survive their escalating attacks. Every day brought new violations and indignities, but I kept meticulous records, knowing that someday I'd need every piece of evidence to prove I wasn't the crazy one in this situation. Living under siege was exhausting beyond description. I couldn't sleep properly, jumping at every sound that might be them breaking in again. Eating became difficult with the constant stress. Work performance suffered despite my efforts to compartmentalize. Derek tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain wearing on him too. My parents had turned my life into a war zone where every normal activity required strategic planning and constant vigilance. But through it all, I kept documenting and planning because I knew the only way out was to be smarter and more patient than the people who'd raised me to be their perpetual victim. My salvation came from an unexpected source during my darkest moment. I was at a coffee shop, exhausted from another sleepless night, when I overheard a woman at the next table talking about managing an apartment complex. She mentioned something about helping tenants escape domestic situations discreetly, and my desperation overcame my usual caution. I introduced myself and asked if we could talk. That woman was Janine, and she would become my guardian angel in the battle for my freedom. Janine listened to my story without judgment, occasionally nodding with grim recognition. When I finished, she shared her own history of escaping controlling parents who'd stalked her through 3 states before she finally broke free. She understood the isolation, the way people dismissed parental abuse as simple family drama, and most importantly, she knew how to disappear effectively. Her apartment complex had become an informal safe house for people escaping various situations, and she'd learned how to help people vanish from their abusers legally and safely. The secret lease arrangement was brilliant in its simplicity. Janine had me sign under a shortened version of my name, using only my first initial and middle name, which my parents had never used in any documentation. All utilities would temporarily run through her management company's accounts, making it impossible to trace through standard searches. The apartment was in a building with security cameras, controlled access, and most importantly, a staff trained to protect tenant privacy. She even had a unit on the 3rd floor with a clear view of all entrances, perfect for someone who'd need to monitor their surroundings. My moving strategy required military precision and complete secrecy. I couldn't use moving trucks or take time off work without raising suspicion. Instead, I began the slow process of migrating my life one bag at a time. During lunch breaks, I'd pack a small suitcase with essentials and drive to the new place. After work, I'd take another load, always varying my routes and checking for followers. Weekends meant multiple trips disguised as shopping runs or gym visits. Each journey out meant potentially being followed, so I developed elaborate routines with multiple stops to shake any surveillance. Keeping my old apartment looking lived in became crucial to the deception. I left lights on timers to simulate my presence. The TV played on a schedule matching my old routine. I scattered mail strategically and even left dirty dishes in the sink occasionally, knowing my parents would check these details during their break-ins. Fresh food appeared and disappeared from the refrigerator thanks to careful planning. I wanted them to think I was simply avoiding them rather than executing a careful escape plan that would leave them surveilling an empty apartment. The mail forwarding puzzle required creative solutions since standard forwarding would leave a paper trail leading directly to my new location. Instead, I rented a private mailbox at a shipping store near my office, then had that forwarded to another box across town. Only the second box forwarded to my actual new address, creating layers of misdirection. Important items like bank statements switched to electronic delivery going to a new email address. Everything had to be rerouted without triggering notifications that might reach my parents through their various infiltrations. Work became an unexpected ally after months of suspicion. My detailed documentation finally convinced HR and Richard that I was facing severe stalking rather than experiencing mental health issues. The turning point came when I showed them footage of my father sending those spoofed emails from the internet cafe. HR's legal team suddenly became very interested in protecting the company from liability. They agreed to let me work remotely, understanding that coming to the office made me an easy target for parental ambushes. The official reason was a special project requiring focused attention, giving me cover for my sudden absence from the building. Financial separation proved complex but essential. I opened accounts at a credit union across town that my parents had never heard of, using my work address for all correspondence. Moving money had to happen slowly to avoid triggering fraud alerts that might involve them as former emergency contacts. $20 here, $50 there, gradually building a safety net in accounts they couldn't touch. I got a new credit card sent to my private mailbox and slowly transitioned all automatic payments. Each financial thread connecting us had to be carefully severed without creating suspicious patterns. The burner phone became my lifeline to reality. I bought a prepaid device with cash, giving the number only to Derek, Janine, and my lawyer. This phone never entered my old apartment and stayed turned off unless actively needed. My regular phone continued its normal patterns, complete with tracked locations showing me at familiar places. I'd leave it playing podcasts at the old apartment while I actually worked from the new place. Technology that had been used against me became a tool for misdirection as I fed false data to their tracking apps. Creating false trails required understanding how my parents thought and what they expected to find. I left a diary in an obvious place filled with entries about feeling overwhelmed and considering a vacation to clear my head. Brochures for meditation retreats appeared on my counter. I bookmarked flights to various destinations on my laptop, knowing they'd check. Travel guides from the library sat prominently on my coffee table. Every false clue pointed toward me planning a temporary escape rather than permanent relocation, buying time before they'd realize I was truly gone. The storage unit served as my security vault for irreplaceable items. Under Tara's name and paid with cash, it held photo albums, important documents, grandmother's jewelry, and anything else I couldn't risk losing if my parents destroyed the old apartment in rage. Moving these items required extreme caution since they'd notice immediately if family photos disappeared. I created digital copies first, then slowly removed originals, replacing them temporarily with good color copies that would pass casual inspection. Every precious thing migrated to safety while leaving believable replicas behind. Throughout this exhausting process, I maintained the appearance of normal life to avoid triggering their suspicion. I attended some family dinners, letting them berate me about boundaries while internally counting down to freedom. Their invasive questions got vague answers that seemed like reluctant sharing. I mentioned being busy with work projects, which was technically true. When they pushed about Derek, I hinted at relationship troubles to explain any changes in routine. Every interaction became a performance where I played the defeated daughter slowly coming back under their control while secretly dismantling every chain they'd wrapped around my life. The hardest part was the isolation. I couldn't tell friends about the plan because my parents had compromised those relationships. Claire's betrayal meant family was off limits. Only Derek knew the full truth, and I limited his involvement to protect him from retaliation. Janine provided practical support but maintained professional distance. My lawyer offered legal guidance but couldn't help with the emotional toll. I spent months essentially alone with my secret, unable to share the fear, exhaustion, or tiny victories with anyone who might accidentally reveal something. The loneliness felt like another weight added to an already unbearable load, but it was the price of escape. 3 months into my secret relocation, everything was finally in place for the last phase. I'd successfully moved 90% of my belongings, established my new life across town, and maintained the illusion that I still lived in the old apartment. My parents had no idea their surveillance target was essentially a ghost house. Now came the dangerous part where I'd turn their criminal behavior against them. I spent a week installing high-definition cameras covering every possible angle of the old apartment, hidden carefully where their previous searches hadn't reached. The bait required careful consideration to be believable. I crafted a fake delivery notice for expensive jewelry, supposedly a gift from Derek for our anniversary. The notice sat prominently on my kitchen counter, stating the package would be left with the building manager on Friday afternoon. I added touches to sell the story, including a printed email exchange with Derek about surprising me with something special and my response about working late that day. I even called the building manager to warn him I was expecting an important delivery, knowing my parents had cultivated him as an information source. Moving day arrived with military precision. While my parents attended their regular Friday afternoon country club gathering, I executed the final extraction. Derek helped load my remaining clothes and personal items into his truck. We worked silently and efficiently, both aware this was the point of no return. I walked through the apartment one last time, ensuring cameras were recording and all evidence of my trap remained visible. The jewelry delivery notice, fake diary entries about vacation plans, and staged normalcy would convince my parents nothing had changed. Professional witnesses added legitimacy to my departure. I'd hired 2 off-duty security guards through Janine's connections, men experienced in domestic situations who understood the importance of documentation. They recorded video of the apartment's condition before we left, showing everything intact and properly secured. One guard noted the locked windows, undamaged doors, and functional security system. Their testimony would prove crucial later when my parents tried to claim they'd entered with permission or found the apartment already ransacked. That night, my parents took the bait exactly as predicted. Camera footage showed them arriving at 11 p.m., dressed in dark clothing and carrying bags. They tried their copied key first, finding it useless against the changed locks. Without hesitation, my father produced a crowbar from his bag and began working on the door frame. The sound of splintering would echo through the hallway camera's audio. Within minutes, they'd destroyed the lock mechanism and forced their way inside, stepping over wooden debris from their break-in. The destruction that followed exceeded even my worst expectations. They tore through the apartment like tornadoes, searching for the valuable jewelry mentioned in the fake notice. My mother emptied drawers onto floors while my father ripped cushions off furniture. They pulled clothes from closets, dumped bathroom cabinets, even removed ventilation grates looking for hidden packages. The carefully placed diary was thrown aside after they'd photographed pages. Kitchen cabinets were swept clear, dishes shattering on tiles. Their frustration grew with each passing minute as they found no jewelry and slowly realized something was wrong. Multiple neighbors called 911 about the break-in in progress. Mrs. Chen reported hearing loud crashes and seeing strangers in dark clothing entering my apartment. The college students next door called about screaming and things breaking. Another neighbor provided detailed descriptions of 2 people who'd been harassing building residents for months. The dispatcher, hearing multiple calls about an active burglary with destruction of property, sent units immediately. The building's entrance camera caught 3 police cars arriving with lights flashing. My parents were still ransacking the bedroom when police entered through the broken door. Body camera footage later showed my mother clutching my jewelry box while my father stood amid destroyed furniture. Both froze as officers commanded them to show their hands. Instead of complying, my father stepped forward aggressively, shouting that this was his daughter's apartment and they had every right to be there. He claimed I was missing, possibly kidnapped by my boyfriend, and they were searching for clues. The lie came so naturally it was chilling to watch later. The officers remained professionally skeptical, asking for identification and proof of their claims. My mother fumbled for her phone, insisting she had text messages proving I'd asked them to check on things. Of course, no such messages existed. Their story kept changing as they were questioned separately. First, they had permission. Then I'd given them a key. Then the door was already open. Then they'd broken in because they were worried. The inconsistencies mounted as they desperately tried to justify the obvious forced entry and vandalism surrounding them. When officers asked how to contact me, my parents provided my old number, which went straight to voicemail since I'd disabled the service. They didn't have my new number because I'd never given it to them. Their panic increased as they realized they couldn't produce their missing daughter to validate their claims. My father's temper finally exploded when an officer suggested they'd committed breaking and entering. He shoved the officer while shouting about parental rights, immediately getting tackled to the ground. My mother screamed and grabbed another officer's arm, resulting in both being restrained. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The broken door frame showed clear forced entry. Their bags contained burglary tools including the crowbar, lock picks, and a glass cutter. The destruction inside was documented extensively. Neighbors provided statements about ongoing harassment. Building security footage showed them casing the building earlier that week. My written statement, delivered through my lawyer, confirmed I'd revoked any permission for them to enter months ago. The prosecuting attorney later said it was one of the clearest breaking and entering cases he'd seen. Additional charges piled up quickly. Assault on a police officer for my father's shove. Resisting arrest for both of them. Vandalism for the extensive damage. Stalking charges based on neighbor testimony and documentation I'd provided. Attempted theft for the jewelry box in my mother's hands. The burglary tools suggested premeditation. Their phones, seized as evidence, contained years of photos taken inside my apartment without permission. Text messages between them discussed surveillance strategies and ways to regain control over their wayward daughter. Every piece of digital evidence strengthened the case against them. My phone erupted with notifications as news of my parents' arrest spread through our social network. I watched from my new apartment, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety as the plan succeeded beyond my expectations. Extended family members who'd been fed their narrative for months suddenly questioned everything. Cousins texted asking if I was really missing. Aunts called demanding explanations. My grandmother left a voicemail crying about seeing her son in handcuffs on the news. The family explosion I'd anticipated was beginning, but I stayed silent on my lawyer's advice. The bail hearing became a public spectacle that shattered my parents' carefully maintained image. They'd spent decades cultivating reputations as devoted parents and upstanding community members. Now their mugshots appeared in local news coverage about the dramatic arrest. The country club crowd they'd tried so hard to impress whispered about the scandal. Their church friends struggled to reconcile the couple they knew with the criminals described in police reports. My mother's charity board asked her to step down pending resolution of the charges. My father's business partners distanced themselves from someone facing assault charges. Derek and I attended the hearing virtually on my lawyer's recommendation, maintaining my physical safety while fulfilling legal obligations. Watching my parents in orange jumpsuits felt surreal after years of them controlling every aspect of my appearance and behavior. They looked smaller somehow, their power stripped away by the system they'd tried to manipulate against me. When the judge set bail at $50,000 each due to the assault charges and flight risk, my mother sobbed while my father's face turned purple with rage. Their lawyer argued for lower amounts, but the prosecutor effectively presented them as dangerous stalkers with means and motive to continue harassment. They spent the entire weekend in jail before managing bail, giving me breathing room to implement additional safety measures. Janine helped me install extra security in my new apartment. Derek and I varied our routines constantly. I obtained temporary restraining orders that would become permanent after conviction. My lawyer coordinated with prosecutors to ensure I wouldn't have to appear in person for proceedings. Every step prioritized my safety while building the strongest possible case against the people who'd terrorized me for years under the guise of parental love. Their attempts to contact me post-release violated bail conditions immediately. They called my office demanding to speak with me, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails when refused. They showed up at Derek's workplace, creating another scene that required security intervention. Friends reported receiving desperate calls begging for information about my whereabouts. Each violation was documented and reported, tightening the legal noose they'd placed around their own necks. Their lawyer must have advised them to stop, but their compulsion to control overrode any legal wisdom. The family fracture cut deep but brought unexpected allies. My Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, reached out through my lawyer with a shocking admission. She'd watched my mother's controlling behavior since childhood but felt powerless to intervene. She offered to testify about patterns of manipulation and control spanning decades. Two cousins came forward with their own stories of my parents' invasive behavior during family gatherings. Even my father's brother admitted he'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't wanted to interfere. The family secret was finally exposed, and survivors emerged from silence. Claire's awakening happened gradually as she watched our parents' behavior without me as a buffer. She called through my lawyer, begging to talk, but I wasn't ready to trust again. She sent a long letter detailing how they'd manipulated her throughout her life, using her as a weapon against me while maintaining control through financial dependence. She'd started therapy after realizing her entire worldview had been shaped by their narratives. While I felt sympathy for her situation, the betrayal was too fresh to consider reconciliation. Maybe someday we could rebuild, but not while I was still healing from wounds she'd helped inflict. The legal proceedings moved slowly but steadily toward justice. Their lawyer tried various defenses, from claiming diminished capacity due to worry about their daughter to arguing that previous access implied ongoing permission. Each argument fell apart against the mountain of evidence I'd compiled. The security footage was damning. Neighbor testimony painted a clear pattern of harassment. The break-in tools suggested premeditation. Their own phones contained years of evidence showing systematic stalking. The prosecutor told me it was one of the strongest cases she'd handled, particularly because I'd documented everything so meticulously. During this time, my professional life began recovering from their sabotage. Colleagues who'd witnessed the office drama now understood the truth. Richard apologized for doubting me and restored my position on sensitive accounts. HR implemented new policies about verifying claims made by family members. My reputation rebuilt slowly as people realized I'd been victimized rather than unstable. The remote work arrangement became permanent, giving me flexibility to heal while maintaining my career. Success became its own form of revenge against parents who'd tried to destroy everything I'd built. The guilty verdict brought relief but not celebration. They received 2 years probation, 6 months of house arrest with ankle monitors, mandatory therapy, and substantial fines. The restraining orders became permanent with serious consequences for violation. They had to pay restitution for the apartment damage and my legal fees. Their criminal records would follow them forever, destroying the respectable image they'd cherished. Yet watching them receive consequences felt hollow compared to the years of trauma they'd inflicted. Justice was served, but it couldn't return the time, relationships, and peace they'd stolen from me. My healing journey required more than legal victory. The hypervigilance they'd created took months to fade. I still checked locks obsessively and startled at unexpected knocks. Sleep came easier in the new apartment but remained fitful. Therapy helped process the complex grief of losing parents who'd never truly existed as I'd believed. The loving caretakers I'd thought I had were fictional constructs hiding controlling abusers. Mourning that illusion while celebrating freedom created emotional whiplash that only time and professional help could resolve. Derek proposed on a quiet evening 6 months after the trial, understanding the weight of that commitment given everything we'd endured. He'd seen me at my lowest, supported me through the escape, and stood firm against my parents' attempts to destroy our relationship. His proposal was simple and private, respecting my need for personal moments free from public spectacle. I said yes while crying, not from joy alone but from the profound relief of choosing my own future. We planned a small ceremony with only trusted friends, security included, because some wounds require ongoing protection even in celebration. 2 years have passed since that night my parents broke into my empty apartment for the last time. I'm 30 now, married to Derek, and living in a different state where nobody knows our history unless we choose to share it. The hypervigilance has faded to reasonable caution. I can answer my door without panic, though I still check peepholes first. Sleep comes easier, though sometimes Derek holds me through nightmares where I'm trapped in that old apartment again. Recovery isn't linear, but each month brings new peace. Therapy became my lifeline for processing trauma I'd normalized throughout childhood. My therapist helped me recognize that the invasion and control I'd experienced as an adult were extensions of lifelong patterns. The parents who'd read my diary as a teenager were the same ones who'd broken into my apartment. The mother who'd guilt-tripped me for having friends in high school was the same one who'd sabotaged my adult relationships. Understanding these connections helped me stop blaming myself for not seeing the danger sooner. When you're raised in dysfunction, it feels normal until something dramatic forces you to see clearly. Learning to set boundaries without guilt required rewiring decades of programming. I practiced saying no to small things first, then worked up to bigger requests. The first time I declined a social invitation without providing an elaborate excuse felt revolutionary. When coworkers pushed for personal information, I learned to redirect conversations professionally. Each boundary held made the next one easier. Derek helped by modeling healthy limits in his own life and celebrating my progress. We created a home where both our needs mattered equally, something I'd never experienced before. Claire reached out again a year after the trial, having spent that time in intensive therapy and completely separated from our parents. She'd moved across the country, changed careers, and built her own support system. Her letter acknowledged the depth of her betrayal without expecting forgiveness. She understood if I never wanted contact but wanted me to know she was breaking the cycle too. After months of consideration and discussions with my therapist, I agreed to one video call. Seeing her cry while taking full accountability began healing that wound, though trust would take years to rebuild if ever. We now exchange emails monthly and had coffee during a recent work trip to her city. She showed me her own restraining order against our parents, obtained after they'd tried manipulating her into finding me. She'd recorded their attempts, learning from my example about documentation. We compared notes on therapy discoveries and childhood memories that looked different through adult eyes. While we'll never have a typical sister relationship, we're building something new on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect for boundaries. Sometimes broken things reshape into something stronger. My blog about escaping controlling families started as therapy homework but grew into a resource helping thousands. Writing our story anonymously let me process trauma while providing roadmaps for others trapped in similar situations. Readers share their own experiences with parents, partners, or relatives who use love as a weapon for control. We discuss documentation strategies, legal options, and safety planning. The comment sections became support groups where survivors validate each other's experiences. Knowing my pain helps others escape gives meaning to those dark years. The blog led to consulting work with domestic violence organizations about parental abuse, an under-recognized form of family violence. I help train advocates to understand that age doesn't prevent someone from being victimized by parents. We develop resources for adult children facing stalking, harassment, and control from family members. Law enforcement receives education about taking these cases seriously rather than dismissing them as family drama. Each training session chips away at the systemic ignorance that trapped me for so long. Our new life looks nothing like what my parents planned for me. Derek and I live in a modest house with strong security in a quiet neighborhood where we know our neighbors. I work remotely for a company that values my contributions without drama. We have game nights with trusted friends who respect our privacy. Holidays are spent with chosen family rather than blood relatives. We're considering children but only after more healing and with clear plans for protecting them from grandparents they'll never meet. Every choice is ours alone, free from manipulation or guilt. The no-contact decision remains firm despite flying monkeys attempting reconciliation. Relatives forward letters claiming my parents have changed, found religion, or deserve forgiveness before they die. Each message gets filed unopened with my lawyer. Their probation officer confirmed they completed mandatory therapy but violated restraining orders twice, resulting in jail time. They apparently tell everyone I'm mentally ill and Derek brainwashed me, unable to accept responsibility even now. Their delusion protects my safety because they search for someone who no longer exists while I live freely under legal name changes. Sometimes grief ambushes me in unexpected moments. Seeing healthy parent-child relationships can trigger mourning for what I never had. Mother's Day and Father's Day bring complex emotions. Wedding planning without parental involvement felt simultaneously liberating and sad. But these moments pass more quickly now, processed through therapy tools and Derek's support. The grief exists alongside gratitude for freedom. I can feel both without letting pain overwhelm the life I built from their ashes. My story ends not with hatred but with hard-won wisdom about family, love, and self-preservation. Family isn't about blood but about respect, kindness, and healthy boundaries. Love doesn't demand access to every part of your life or require sacrificing your autonomy. When someone shows you through actions that they'll hurt you to maintain control, believe them the first time. No amount of shared DNA obligates you to accept abuse, regardless of what society says about family bonds. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for everyone is walk away and never look back. For those reading while trapped in similar situations, know that escape is possible even when it seems hopeless. Document everything, trust your instincts about danger, and don't let anyone convince you that family gets unlimited chances to hurt you. Build your support network carefully, save money secretly, and make plans they can't anticipate. The path to freedom is scary and difficult, but living authentically without fear is worth every challenge. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect rather than control disguised as concern. 2 years later, I sleep peacefully in a home where nobody enters without permission. My phone contains only numbers I chose to save. My workplace knows me for my skills rather than my family drama. Friends respect my boundaries because I respect theirs. Derek and I build our future together without interference or manipulation. This ordinary life feels extraordinary after years of siege. Freedom tastes like morning coffee drunk in peace, like choosing my own clothes without criticism, like laughing without monitoring who might use it against me. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope you found something helpful whether you're facing family control or supporting someone who is. What boundaries do you struggle to set with family members? Have you ever had to choose between your well-being and family expectations? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about surviving and thriving after family trauma. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with controlling relatives. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that you deserve relationships that bring peace rather than constant vigilance. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never apologize for protecting your own well-being.